Well, there's a new talking point kicking around Washington. You may have heard it in the last few days. The Uranium One story isn't real. It's an ersatz story. It's fake news made up by Republicans. It's a fever dream concocted by people who hate Hillary Clinton and are desperate to create a false equivalence between Donald Trump's presidential campaign and the Clinton machine. Hillary's reputation is being protected by the usual defenders. They say she had nothing to do with Uranium One, and by the way, it wouldn't matter if she was involved, but she wasn't involved anyway. Got it? Interesting question. What's the truth about it? Well, Guy Benson is an editor at townhall.com. He's written a definitive explanation of this story, which seemed pretty fair to us, and he joins us tonight. Guy, thanks a lot for coming on.
Hey, Tucker, congrats on 1 year, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thanks a lot. So,
sure.
Look, I'll concede, and I hope that I've always conceded every time we've talked about it on this show, that there's a lot that we don't know about this story, and I hope that we haven't overhyped it. But it does seem like there is a story at the bottom of it. You've assessed it maybe a little more coolly than I have. What have you found? Is this a real story?
Well, I think it's a question that's interesting, Tucker, because the story that's being told a lot by Republicans, there is a former White House advisor who is talking about this as if it was treasonous on behalf of Mrs. Clinton. I think there's maybe a mythical side to this, where people have a lot of misconceptions about especially the tail end of the Uranium One story and Mrs. Clinton's involvement in that. And because this came up recently in a story in The Hill about how the FBI had been investigating Russia's efforts on that whole front involving the Clintons a few weeks ago, Republicans have, I think, seized on that to try to draw some sort of equivalency on the broader Russia matter, and that has prompted a bunch of fact checks. And I think some of these fact checks have been really solid and good, clearing up some of the laziness or deliberately wrong characterizations of what happened with Uranium One. That all being said, there are elements of the entire saga, which started back in 2005, that I don't think are threats to national security, certainly not treasonous, maybe not criminal, but at least stink to high heaven when it comes to the Clintons and lots of money flowing to their foundation on behalf of people connected to Uranium One who needed favors and got them.
Well, so you made, I thought, a really good point, and it was worth reminding our viewers of it, that this story wasn't concocted in the basement of the RNC or by Andrew Breitbart, but this was originally broken by the New York Times.
That's right.
And they detailed former President Clinton's trip to Kazakhstan, where all of this began, and it's complicated and actually worth Googling if you're watching at home. But the bottom line, I think, is this. We know that Uranium One hired the Podesta Group to lobby the Obama administration on this, that there was lobbying by this company on behalf of Russian interests. That's not really disputed. And you got to sort of wonder why, at the same time that money is flowing not just to the Clinton Foundation, but to the Clinton family. Again, I can't connect every dot, but I don't think you can just dismiss that as, like, insane conspiracy theorizing, can you?
Well, no, and so the New York Times story that you just referenced was from 2015. There was also a New York Times story that revealed that Bill Clinton and his team, his entourage, at first had lied about a meeting that occurred at the Clintons' home in Chappaqua with officials from Kazakhstan, and then they were told, actually, there's photo evidence that this occurred, and then they changed their story. That initial New York Times story that was very extensive, very exhaustive, got into a lot of detail about this, including the president, the former president, going over there and striking this very lucrative deal with a man who ended up donating tens of millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation. So that, I think, to me, and then later on, I should add, there was some jeopardy in one of these deals involving Uranium One with the Kazakh government, and there was a request from that company for intervention from the U.S. government. And right away, the U.S. State Department and the embassy got involved, and wouldn't you know it, the issue got resolved. Hillary Clinton was running the State Department at that time, after lots of money had exchanged hands. So there are, to me, Tucker, some questions about this that not just people like me who are asking them, the New York Times and other journalists have been asking them for years, that smell weird and look like influence peddling and money trading, that may not get up to the hyper-partisan level of hyperventilation that we've seen from some Republicans about this, saying, oh my gosh, Hillary Clinton sold out our nuclear program.
Yeah, but let me
which
ask
isn't
you
true.
one. We're almost out of time. Let me ask you one question.
Sure.
If you notice that it's the same people who are telling us the single gravest threat to American national security is the Russian government, those same people who are telling us that day in and day out are now dismissing Russian attempts to move uranium out of this country to other countries is like no big deal, and you're some kind of alt-right wacko if you think that's a big deal. Both of those things can't be true.
It was more about the Russian government controlling mining interests in the U.S., not taking uranium out of the U.S. into Russia.
Well, the U.S. government has conceded that they have taken uranium out of this country. I mean, that's
to me, Tucker, I think if we're going to talk about the Democrats and the Russia situation, I think the more fertile ground, uranium, one, an interesting thing to discover and talk about. To me, it's fusion GPS. That's the piece of this puzzle that I think is the most strange, where we've gotten the fewest answers so far, with more and more coincidences popping up.
Right.
I think that's the approach Republicans should take.
We tried at
the
beginning of this show with a Democratic consultant who started screeching at me. So that's where you know it's obviously fertile ground.
That tends to happen, Tucker.
It does. Guy, it's great to see you. Thanks a lot for that.
Good to see you, Tucker. Thanks.
Here and now with reaction to all of that, Fox News national security strategist, former deputy assistant to the president, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Dr. Gorka, let you respond to that. We have to import uranium into this country. And yet Putin we knew all these things were happening, all these crimes committed. He built a network in the United States. Why anybody would ever allow a foreign entity to have any interest in uranium when we need more and we have to import it never made sense, did it?
Not at all. Not only do we need it, there is legislation that is active today that says America should be absolutely self-sufficient on uranium. It is such a strategic asset that we must not rely upon anybody else. And Hillary Clinton, as the chairman of that committee, approved this deal. The question is, how far up the chain does this go? Does it go up to President Obama as well? And if you look at the statements coming out of Hillary in the last 48 hours, to quote the good bard, the lady doth protest too much. The heat is on, and finally we have a chance. I know Fox viewers have been very, very cynical that these people are Teflon coated and they never pay the price for their crimes. But it seems as if finally, under a Trump administration, this rampant criminal cartel, which goes by the name of Clinton, will finally see some form of justice in the near future.
Let me dovetail into the issue of Senator Grope, Al Franken, and that disgusting picture. Your thoughts?
There's this, somebody said to me tonight, poor Judge Moore, all he has to do is change ticket and become a Democrat, because then he'd be Teflon coated as well. At the end of the day, these things are outrageous. The fact that the left seems to have double standards on these issues. It's only Republicans that get in trouble for these kinds of behaviors. These are all inexcusable. Any kind of sexual act of this nature, whether it's an assault or whether it's something that simply shames a woman afterwards, taking photographs while they're asleep of a sexual nature. Al Franken, I want to see not just the GOP, I don't just want to see the rhinos, I want to see the Democrat senators call for Al Franken's removal, resignation, and recall.
When you talk about a double standard, all the years Democrats have bent over backwards, they have threaded every needle, they have skated every razor's edge so they could defend the Clintons. And there was, in this sense, we knew there was collusion. Well, Hillary stole the primary from Bernie, but we knew that there was media collusion to help Hillary win. And that was proven in no uncertain terms via WikiLeaks. And you watch all of this, but here we are 30 years later, and they did it all the way up and through and until last year's election. And we have to wonder, how do they hold the mantle in their minds when it's not accurate that they're for women's rights, gay and lesbian rights, and freedom of religion? And she takes money from those other countries. You haven't heard a word from Hillary today. You had a whole hit squad to go out there, bimbo eruptions, smearing all those women that did speak out. Your thoughts?
They preach one thing and they do the opposite. Well, the Democrats are supposed to be the party of sexual equality, of trans rights, of protecting the victim. And what do we find? Exactly the opposite. It's a good rule of thumb. When they accuse somebody else of doing something, they're probably doing it themselves. But the interesting thing, Sean, look at that article in the New York Times just 2 days ago, calling Bill Clinton out for his being a sexual predator. It looks as if Hillary and Bill are past their sell-by date. They're no longer relevant to the DNC, and they're going to be thrown under the bus. It took 30 years, but it might be happening.
Dr. Gorka, thank you for being with us.